Okay, I think our meeting is now being live streamed. Welcome, everyone. For the second time today, actually, on Republic Day. First of all, happy Republic Day. This is India's 77th Republic Day. And, very, very interesting changes around the world has actually prompted us to do certain conversations on this very important day because India itself is pivoting into multiple directions, which probably it did not do earlier or needed not to do earlier as well. That is the world we live in. And in order to make some sense of that world, we have with us Commodore Johnson Odakkal. Johnson sir and I, we know each other for almost 3 years now. We are part of the same educator and counselor community. And being the son of a retired Indian Army colonel, I could understand and very quickly relate to his years of service in the Indian Navy, spanning decades. He is a soldier scholar. He is a professor. He has taught students at university level in maritime colleges for maritime programs. He has taught geopolitics. He has taught global politics. He's taught theory of knowledge to high school students in schools such as Aditya Birla World Academy in Mumbai. And when he finds a little bit of time, he writes a little bit. He has been featured in around 100 plus media outlets across the world. One of the things that I admire most about him is the fact that he is able to regularly churn out articles and which make a lot of sense, which bring out those layers of that geopolitical scenario, which otherwise most of us miss out when we are just skimming through the headlines. And I believe Johnson sir does all this so that our young students, our youth today get a little bit of understanding and maybe a small formula how to approach geopolitics in general, how to read through the lines, how to read across the borders, and how to read or make sense of multiple languages saying the same thing. Johnson sir, happy Republic Day. It is my pleasure to have you over.
Happy Republic Day, Saurabh. And it's really an honor and a joy, both as a collaborator and a friend here on your channel.
Sir, first of all, let's talk about the Republic Day. Being a military veteran, I know the importance it has for you. I know the importance it has for the nation. What kind of message or clarity or definition would you like to give to the youngsters who might be listening to this?
It's a very good question because just today morning, out of the many aspects on the Republic Day parade, one of the very endearing and encouraging elements was when Lieutenant Commander Dilna and Lieutenant Commander Rupa led the naval tableau at the Kartavya Path now. What is fascinating is these two officers of the Indian Navy finished a circumnavigation, just two of them, over 250 days to go around the planet in a sailboat. And very timely as the awardees of the Shaurya Chakra, they were today on the Kartavya Path as part of the naval contingent. So that is a symbolism. And in the backdrop of all of this, sometimes we may not pay attention to the word itself, because the word in common lexicon is democracy, protectors of democracy, mother of democracy, all of it. And republic seems to be like a book written by Plato. But choices in 1946 in the Constituent Assembly, Pandit Nehru, while doing the affirmation, mentioned clearly the choice as a republic. And since one of our target is to look at the audience, as you mentioned, there is no age to learning. But at the end of it, our primary target is high schoolers. And let me take a school council representative to give a simple illustration. So democracy is like a student council election. And the one who gets the maximum votes, provided they have not been disqualified by other factors, becomes a student council member. But they can't do what they please. They have to comply with the school regulations. And they exactly is the governance makers, decision makers, and the constitution. So India chooses to be, in the original term, sovereign democratic republic. And of course, we've expanded it to socialist secular, but democratic republic. And I myself, along with my team, and I'm sure many others don't even realize the focus of the republic part of it. It's like what topping to put on a pizza. And so 10 people go and order because they are celebrating something, especially youngsters. So if you take a vote and you choose, but the fact is that pizza topping may not be liked by a significant number of people. So it's a very lightly way presented, but the idea of a republic is not just majoritarianism, but there is order. And that is where India has a functioning judiciary, despite whatever people may criticize. And there's something called the structure of the constitution, which means, yes, policy will be decided by those we choose to elect in a way representative, but they will also have a framework which is robust, which is adaptable, and which has evolved. And that takes a brilliant idea and shuns away from the just logic that, now there is no Raja and we are Praja. But instead of hereditary kingship, we have a system. So it's not about the president replacing a monarch, but that there is a functional guideline to the way the nation is governed. And I think it's very important to reiterate, and Republic Day does give the option. And a lot of thoughts come to mind. Maybe as we go, we'll bring that up. But that's the core idea, that we choose to adopt a constitution. The wording says we give to ourselves this constitution. Very powerful words beyond just what they would mean in language. So that to me is not just as a military veteran to see the brilliance on display on the Kartavya path, but the fact is we work as per an order and structure deeply missing in many parts of the world.
Absolutely true. I mean, my first, thought about what you said is there is order missing in multiple parts of the world. Yet on paper, a lot of those different regions of the world call themselves republics. I mean, a very interesting example comes from the Koreas, wherein North Korea calls itself the Democratic People's Republic of Korea (DPRK). Whereas, well, the world looks at it in a very different way. And if you look at all the analysis of the world, it is not democratic in the traditional sense of the word, I would say. So, how does a country like North Korea call it democratic and republic, and yet the rules that are laid down over there are favoring one particular regime or a family rather than working for the people? How do we come to terms with that? And North Korea is just one example, many other countries as well.
You're absolutely right. DPR, PRC, People's Republic of China. The conceptualization is, debates apart, in their articulation, maybe when it was framed, and I don't want to get into a constitutional debate, because Japan has a constitution, but it's a monarchy. So constitutional alone is not sufficient. So one may choose, being a little careful here, of ones who can be the paragons of democratic virtue and fail to practices for everyone else. Korea or China, on paper, surprisingly, when we look at it, beyond just the figureheads or the people involved, might have a system. But the challenge is that is not practiced. So the failure is not the lack of a system or an order. The criticism of failure is how much is it practiced? I'm not going to diversify the communication on what's happening in the People's Republic of China, but they have a central military commission. They have a system. It is one party. There is representation. There is election. North Korea has elections. Yet, there is a overarching directive and system which leads to us observing from the outside. I don't think you have freedom. So I think there is this aspirational directive to say this is what the republic must look like. And that's where we felt that there is a need to explore both the practical and theoretical aspects of what it means to be a republic. Because even in the times when this term originated, Athenian democracy could be very disruptive and biased. And then you have the Plato's Republic, which brings the idea of an order. The makers of our constitution had a lot to go by. Historically, talking about the US Constitution, Korean, Japanese, German, there are many places to draw. And interestingly, we are reaching, is it the 150th? We are 130 plus amendments. So it is a criticism, but it could be its robustness that we have adapted. So I think some of these countries around the world, and I will be very careful not to mention or malign anyone, but the word republic is definitely not a guarantee of freedom, but probably they believe that they have a system and an order. And that may be varied in its interpretation when it comes across the globe. And so, unfortunately, we treat Korea, but just on a lighter side, there were memes going around where the Korean head said, I am not the craziest one in the world right now, just on the lighter note. So, who knows that if we criticize them for not being republic enough, there are enough people who can be criticized for not being democratic enough.
You're absolutely right. And I think orange is the color nobody likes anymore. Coming to, your recent article, your editorial, which was published today, very timely, very contemporary. Republic in a churn, India in a wide, wild world, where the North Korean premier might say and claim that he's not the craziest in the world. That is the world we are living in right now. And when we put a republic like India in a churn, do you think it's the order of the republic itself that allows us to survive that churn? And if it does allow us to survive the churn, does it also allow us to, I would say, evolve into a more wholesome republic or system?
Let me start the response by saying we have the freedom to write about, question, and even be highly critical of whatever is happening in our country. And I'm proud to say not many countries give you that freedom. So let's begin with that reality, which means we have a range of perspectives from political theory as well as an approach or observation about what is going on. I think what we are seeing is this mix of, can the majority do because it's a majority? Or is there something that we have agreed as a political ethos that this needs to be followed? And into this mix, I believe what has been happening in the past few decades, criticism says is just last decade or so. I don't think so. The churn is there. We are also a civilizational nation. I mean, before I come to what is on immediate, who is India and what is India? Or let's say, Bharat kaun hai? So I could go all the way to Shillong, right? I mean, that's where my daughter studied, and find a way of attire, a way of meal, and relish it. Or I could come to Goa where there is a churn between what was the civilization and what got imposed by the Portuguese. Or then we could come all the way to your place in Jalandhar and, relish something altogether different. We call the wheat bowl and it's churn. Or go back to my place in Kerala. And which one is in India? So why am I bringing this? How much credit we must or we fail to give to the founders of our nation to actually create a framework which could bring all of this together, have aspirations, enable Sardar Patel to talk, persuade, some cases coerce, to say that it's better to have one India. The word India itself, from the geographical feature which is no longer in India, the Indus, Hindustan, so if I think we can spend an entire couple of hours just talking about what is India. Now, why did I bring that as a preamble? For now, we have a very loose definition of centrality versus federalism in India. We have federal states, but they are not federal in the form of maybe Germany or the US or certain other places. Largely, the system is pretty centrally driven. And so in that kind of, my whole churn was, the trigger was a very small thing which could go off in the passing, and I'm not being very critical. But if governors of 3 southern states can skip parts of an address, I'm not going to the justification. I want to defer to the wisdom of the concerned constitutional authority. They must have had their reason. But to me, it opens up a debate that who are we going to value? The authority which the Constitution plays, or the voice of the one who has been elected to be in governance, and the governor's address, the president address, is a declaration of policy. So there is a churn going on. Let's not shy away that what is apt, and are there different phases? And I think it's not a criticism, it's not a vulnerability, it's our strength. The fact that we can talk about it, the fact that we still have elections, however we may criticize different aspects of it. When I'm saying Republican churn, I'm not talking in negative as if it's a whirlpool and things are going to sink. Saying that we have conversations on what we have assumed to have been taken for granted, and we are questioning who is really the head of the government, whether in the center or let's not forget, with all due respects, with the brilliant person at the head of the highest office in India is a figurehead. At the end of the day, it is the elected government who makes the policy, and that's why we call it the executive. And so it is in the states. But states' power is not like center. Despite a concurrent list and state list, my realm of education comes somewhat concurrent list, and yet we have the State Council for Educational Research and Technology and NCRT. We're just going. So I think we are in conversations where the framework of how different states in India, which in another place would have been called provinces, but they are too small to be provinces, how they are evolving, where there are different parties being elected, where there is a divergence of ideology between who's in power in the center and the state. There will be places where the views will differ. Their idea of the policy will differ. And that's exactly representative. I mean, again, sorry, lightly speaking, I might come up with a tandoori momo. Okay, kind of using this too, but the ground reality is we have different ways of doing things. And I think if we are talking about it, we are finding, even in the corridors of governance, we are finding people in a churn where they are questioning. And you could even have somebody as a governor walk out of the governor's address. I think we should not be too agitated. We should allow the questions to be discussed. What is the concern? Is there a need? I'm not saying we don't need another constitutional assembly. I think we have a very robust constitution, but are we republic? Is there a set of order? If there is change, what needs to change? And how much should we retain? So I think that was my whole idea, that India is still unique, that we have a conversation. Unlike many other parts, as I've brought in my book, we still are functioning. Many people felt, Churchill included, that India will collapse. Sorry, we are here. We are here to stay.
Absolutely. In fact, I mean, what I view as democracy is the very fact that it's a structured way of trial and error to figure out what works for us and what doesn't work for us, right? And you might compare it to democracies having very similar cultural values. I mean, you can look at Western Europe and US, Canada, Australia, etc. Even their democracies are not the same. Their democracies are not perfect. Everyone has their own problem. US is still dealing with the gun issues and abortion, whereas Western Europeans, they can't understand, how to get their defense stuff together. So these things will continue. Democracy and probably provide that environment to do the trial and error. And my second part of the question, sir, was this: like, out of this churn, because the churn keeps happening, it's a continuous thing. So, do we have a continuous feedback loop also coming out of the churn, which helps us make the republic stronger for even bigger churns, which might yet to resurface?
I think we certainly do. We have gone through an era of state focused development when things like the Bakra Nangal Dam and all that centralized infrastructure came. We went through a phase when we were literally struggling, and there was this era of welfare and social economics. We came back to a place where communities and aspirations came, the whole Mandal era. We had a rise of what is called a nationalistic spirit, maybe even cultural and ideological spirit. So we have been going through stages and phases. At the same time, we've also had economic liberalization. We have had technological revolution. Okay, we may not be the number one in terms of research and development, but our people are capable, and the way we have taken to change is amazing. Just one example rules the world: digital payment. I want to see another country who took naturally to it, the way we have done it. So, why I talk of some of these tactical aspects along with the larger, broader national point? Because we have a system in place, we can have this churns taking place. And when a major change is required, I believe the government of the day or the conversation of the day will bring that to pass. When there had to be communities and affirmative actions are called reservation, we went. There have been periodic questions about its relevance. When we had to adopt technology, when we have to face times of security threats, we do. And that's exactly what one of my ideas of writing. In fact, I don't have a chapter on India in my book. Uh, Firstly, I don't want to sound biased. But the second part is I genuinely feel, despite all our weakness and vulnerabilities, we are very open to change. We may take a little longer to get there. We do take time, and I think that's our strength. So I think churn in terms of adapting to what's happening in the world is a strength for us. And I don't think there will be huge structural upheavals. We have a structure in place. We will have refinements, which are very welcome.
So at the same time, I mean, so these conversations, these points, these observations that we make about, India as a republic or other countries, ultimately tell us a lot that, at the end of the day, we are all human beings. We have the same kind of psychology. Yes, they are buried under layers of language and culture and regional politics and whatnot. But at the end of the day, we still want the same kind of stability, peace, security that allows us to be who we are and continue doing our thing. When you talk about this in your book, and I think this is the right time to introduce your book as well. So Johnson sir has recently published his latest book. He, as I said, he's an accomplished author. It's called The Wide Wild World, and it is about the various different things which are happening around the world in the last few years, where he has written essays and journals and op-eds about them and compiled them together. In fact, if you read the title of the book, it'll exactly tell you what to expect from the book. It's Divergent Hues of a Chaotic Globe, right? Johnson sir, as I said, he's an accomplished author. This is his third book. And the best part is the last two books that he did publish were almost a dozen years ago. And the last two books that he published was about the timeless wake about the Royal Indian Navy. It's functioning during the World War II. There you go, as you can see on the screen. And we also have his essays on maritime studies that he has published, multiple volumes, I think. Now, sir, this book itself is a testament to the fact that there are so many things which are parallelly happening in the world. And if you go down, if you reduce the noise of it, you go down, you see the same structural challenges those different countries in South America or Southeast Asia face. And they're going through the same issues. Would you like to shed some light on that, sir?
I'll be glad to. In fact, I want to be very mindful and acknowledge what made this possible. I think the very first aspect was that my time in the Navy gave me a ringside view, sometimes actually not ringside, into the arena itself of what's happening in the globe by having conversations in real-time strategic aspects on defense technology and various things across to various players. So that gave me an immersive idea. I'm very grateful for the Navy that the encouragement for academics led me when I was doing the higher command course to do my MPhil in among other things, maritime operations, but also international relations. So three of us, one of them, two of them, one is, of course, one other person is retired, one is heading, I'm not going to take names. We three did a PhD from the University of Mumbai under a very person I'm going to give credit to, Dr. Uttara Sahasrabudhe, former head of Civics and Politics Department, University of Mumbai. And those conversations just led me to immerse not from an operational point of view, but from an analytical point and as a strategic commentator. And that continued my interest to look at places. One of my discoveries was most of the conversations were very American centric and Eurocentric. It's as if the world revolved around them. Unfortunately, many of them still feel so. That's a different aspect. And then there were so many areas where things were happening and we didn't have. So post-retirement, one of the things I'm very grateful for is the opportunity to work with students. And in the IBDP Global Politics course, a brilliant course, I wish I had studied when I was a student. It's that I am challenged when I'm teaching. The amount of preparation, I need help to help me teach. And that's where my team also comes in. I had been teaching, I had been doing a work, and I had this great aspiration that they need real-time case studies, which are about 1 to 3 years old. And it has to be not always about a few countries, but something like lithium mining in Serbia, something like the mineral or a train Lobito corridor in Africa. And I've been looking at it. Then I realized we need to write about it in a manner which is helpful to them. So I had this project in mind called Global Canvas. And because I was actively teaching, I didn't have bandwidth till I got in touch with Ruya College. And suddenly we had the opportunity to have interns. And so we got two interns. One of them was the one who started, that is Kashmira Javatkar and Ruchita Gaikwad. And because they were there to do all this legwork, I mean, my ideas, we need to probe this get, and we would have conversations. Courtesy that the cases started getting published on our blog. When we reached 27 of these, by then Kashmira joined me as a full-time, and I already had Supriya to help with it. I suddenly realized the volume of what we had done. Say, why don't we turn it into a book, shift it from a blog to a more chapter theoretical perspectives? And we did this work published on 9th, on 4th, but things we got the copies by 9th. And so what we did is we found we had written about Venezuelan elections long before Maduro's illegal kidnap, nothing else. It's a kidnap happened. We had written about Greenland elections long before anything. We had talked about, in fact, I didn't realize that we had talked about 6 different elections. Because in 2024, over 60 countries went to polls around the world, including India, causing a major upheaval in who is in governance. Nobody expected the current party to win in Greenland, very pro-independence. So that is what we realize is there's a lot happening around the world in corridors which students or anyone who's an observer of global matters must look at. If you just look at the titles of the chapters, we have across 32 chapters. It's on the initial pages 9. From, as I said, Serbia's lithium dilemma to drones to to debris in space, or Pavel with his telegram. And people have encouraged us by their feedback. So I'm hoping that same encouragement we got through the blogs. Now that the book is there, it's a steal at about whatever 500 odd. The point is not there, maybe $8 or whatever. The issue is it was meant to facilitate curious learners and observers to begin their conversation. It's not the final work. It's not a settled thing. It's a conversation starter. It's a research starter. And I think that's what we feel proud of having achieved. I'm happy to talk about a few things, but I just had to set, I'm so grateful. See, this is what happens in intellectual work. Collaboration actually enhances. If it had not been for my thesis work and my guide, I wouldn't have reached Ruya. If it had not been to Ruya, I wouldn't have had Kashmir. And there have been many more. I mean, I've acknowledged them. That's the amazing work where learning is a collaborative work where we enhance each other. And this is an attempt to give back to the community. Look, this is ready-made. Happy to serve you and do more things in the future.
Absolutely, and the way you put it together, sir, it's as I said, it's very readable. It's almost like you're reading a fictional thriller, but hey, we're actually living in a fictional thriller right now in the world. Nobody had expected a pandemic. Nobody had expected the US to behave the way it is behaving. And in 2024, as you rightly pointed out, around 60% of the world's population was going to elections, including India and so on. And I think Venezuela, talking about Venezuelan elections, again, this is just for students listening to this. There's a lot of trivia involved in this. You should definitely take out one of those strings and go into that rabbit hole. You'll love it. Venezuela actually has one of the most robust election systems in the world. And 24 elections, Maduro did not announce the results for a reason, even though he's autocratic leader and currently under kidnapping by the US. But he did not declare the results because probably he did not win, right? So elections are that important, even if it is all about the quality of the elections. That's a separate thing. The other aspect is one of the reasons, one of the suggestions by a lot of experts about Trump's current behavior is around the fact that the midterm elections in the US are coming. They're around the corner. And with the current behavior and the current things that he has done, he does not have a lot of support. So the Republicans might lose a lot of their power in Congress and Senate. And just to avoid that, just to escape from it, just to do other things, he's diverting attention to external factors. Bringing me to two major questions, sir, to you. You talked about India's liberalization in 1991, right? It was the external factor which allowed us to do reforms internally. Otherwise, we were not ready to do reforms. With the current state of affairs in the world, where we are being punitively, treated by major powers, we practically have very little, confirm or certain relations with the current superpowers of the world. Our neighbors are creating their own alliances, military, politically, and so on. So India finds itself in a very, very difficult spot. I believe after the US, India might be the most lonely superpower out there right now. Do you think these external factors will actually allow India to do the reforms that we have been waiting for for many, many years after the liberalization era?
So I might articulate it a little differently. Whether what will finally trigger the change is also how much needs to change. One aspect, and I know I might be jumping the gun here, is I teach, though I am not the right person for grade 8 and history, but I teach an idea called strategic autonomy to even grade 8 students. And in that, one of my case stories is India. That when everyone expected naturally when Britain granted under compulsion to give India independence, they expected we and our military will become vassals to them and will serve their purposes in this part of the world. And I give credit to those in the beginning that they knew that they were not going to do it. So when combining with Tito and Sadat and Sukarno and Nehru, when they formed the non-aligned movement, the relevance today may be a different issue. We clearly navigated a path where we said we will reconnect as we need. In terms of autonomy, I am taking this different. When we had to evolve our military capability, and being a naval veteran, I'm proud of the fact today we talk of Atmanirbharta. We went into self-dependence and indigenous production in 1960s, the Navy, because we knew we didn't have an option. And one of the reasons today they criticize on Russian oil, but when Britain continued to deny submarine technology to India for over 2 decades, one visit of Y.B. Chavan and the father of current foreign minister, then K. Subramaniam, when they went to Russia, we were offered submarines, we were offered as further the Osa class missile boats, which became very famous in 71. Why am I mentioning this is, we have very deftly navigated with no malice or ill will, connections across as required. And I think that is our position, that is our strategic posture, that where needed, we'll connect. Come many years later, I'm not going through the stages of we have had sanctions imposed after the nuclear blast and all of that. The signing of the civil nuclear deal treaty showed that now you could work, and we have very major assets, strategic assets. Yeah, India is one of the interesting places where we have strategic capability from different sources. And I think that's the right exactly of a country's autonomy. The idea of, though sovereignty as a concept is getting questioned, whether you take Westphalian or Montevideo or what, Mark Carney recently said we have permanent rupture of the world order. There is nothing called rule-based order. Davos, his speech must be studied by every student of international relations. People forget that he is a scholar, right? So when he says rupture, so things may have ruptured. That is why I don't think we need to drastically evolve from this whole idea of a strategic autonomic posture we have done, where if we are one of the leading people in BRICS Plus, it doesn't mean that we are cutting off from other people. We will handle what needs to be handled. And that is the aspect. So my take is, I don't think there's too much of reform, but yes, in a place I agree. It brings to light, while collaboration may be a very popular thing in a liberal institutional approach, like sab mil baat ke kaam karenge, it actually doesn't happen unless you have power and strength of your own. So if you have to do a blade edge technology for a turbine for an aircraft, our scientists and engineers will have to find the answer independent of others. If we supported business process outsourcing and computer source data, then in AI, it's not enough to copy. We need to lead something, whatever comes post AI. Why are we looking at AI? Why not cast a vision another couple of decades ahead? Space, name it. You remember all the denial of technology of the cryogenic engines and ISRO. And today, how proudly, despite some failures of the PSLV, we are doing because we developed it. So in that element, yes, it's not a reform, it's a realization that Others will give you till it is convenient to them. Your strength must be your own, and I think we have, and may take longer. We were a major power of the world long before the current superpowers existed. I mean, before they are a few hundred years old. We have had our times, then we've had our challenges. So, in that sense, you can never separate yourselves from what is happening around the world or in your region. You will be influenced by it. But as I said, a capability based approach where we are clear of a broad vision and some of the things articulated. And here is what I say. It actually, I found it surprising that it doesn't matter which party is in power in India. The broad contours of our economic development and the broad contours of our foreign policy remain unchanged. The packaging changes. That's all. I mean, something has to change on the outside. So they broadly remain unchanged. And that is why I feel we know what it needs for us to grow. The pace may change and the minor details may change, but I think we are largely on track.
Beautiful. So just to take out another thread from what Sir said, and this is for the youngsters out there, you should definitely look up history, especially the last 200-300 years. You will see most of the nations, they were I would say very conservative in going and collaborating. That's why the Meiji Restoration happened. That's why China wanted to push out all the imperialists out of its country for at one time. US did not really participate in any major war till the time Pearl Harbor happened. So you need to understand that every country does the same thing. But when you choose a side during Cold War, you will see countless examples in Central Asia or in South America or in Southeast Asia, Indochina region, where bigger powers have created a lot of havoc in those smaller countries. And we see that now happening with a lot of smaller countries like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Israel. They all have their geopolitical ambitions, and they're doing a lot of proxy wars in a lot of smaller, poorer countries, which is not helping anybody in that region, let alone them. So, and that being said, sir, you pointed out something very interesting. I just want to add to that. When you said that most of the geopolitical studies that you were doing, they were US centric, from the US narrative message, European centric, their worldview, right? There's a very famous professor, Sarah Payne, who actually teaches at the US Naval War College. I think she's retired now. She herself says, if you really want to understand the history of a country, you need to learn the language first. And stop looking at it from your own lens. You have to understand what they are, who they are, and everything, right? And then you'll develop a perspective. my lead to the next question will be this, sir. You said UPI, we have taken it like fish to water, and around 20 countries, including countries like Singapore, have now started their own systems based on UPI from India. Do you think a lot of other like-minded countries, which are smaller but rich, or middle powers or emerging economies, they have a voice in the world, Indonesias of the world, the Mexicos of the world? Do you think these countries, I'm not talking about BRICS plus per se, because, well, it has its own challenges, but do you think these countries can come together and maybe come up with a different form of democracy itself, which allows us to manage geopolitical challenges like de-dollarization, like the gold standard, or like the hegemony of the West, in a much more civilized way, which we are, as humans, we are capable of?
I'm glad you asked that. I want to just finish one thing which I missed. You mentioned something about Venezuela, and let me close because that's the most popular. Here is the part, and I think we indirectly have mentioned in a book, not the exact stats. When the 2024 elections happened in Venezuela, as you rightly said, there was a delay in announcing, and the National Electoral Council, CNI, announced Maduro won with 51.2%. The opposition had collected 81.7% of the paper tally sheets. Extrapolating, it showed that Edmundo Gonzalez had won 67% of the vote. Now, it does not justify you arrive first. We know now that you first turn some close security guards against him, because Maduro used to shift houses almost every night, and then you go and kidnap the president. I'm not justifying. But sometimes, do you realize that when you fail to run your structures the way they are meant to, then you open yourself to be vulnerable. Otherwise, if the country stands together, nobody can touch you. And that's been like one of our strengths. And that is exactly where I'm coming to. Why I needed that lead is that whether it's about rare earths, which is a lot, Greenland is not about some polar bears or some Russia, China, Greenland is about the rare earths. Uh, when you talk of UPI, and let me talk about the elephant in the room, de-dollarization. One of the initial threats that Trump gave to the BRICS is you dare not de-dollarize. Even in Venezuela, the night before, there was a conversation with the Chinese delegation. China is owed billions by Venezuela. Nobody now knows what is going to happen about that. And while there are challenges, as you mentioned, in BRICS Plus about how to bring a BRICS currency with Brazil, Russia, China, South Africa, but conversations are going. You mentioned the gold standard. Interestingly, I don't like to forecast, but what India has demonstrated through the UPI, in some forms in UAE, in Singapore, in a few places, UPI has already started functioning in a very, very limited manner. Just imagine that journey. You don't need even a currency. So when I'm not going into how did India pay for Russian oil, which everyone has. The problem was not Russian oil. Problem was how we were paying. We were not paying in dollars. A lot of people don't realize the hegemony is not US. The hegemony is the US Saudi Doral petroleum nexus. And it is almost mafia-like. That two people who are radically opposite in all their ideologies are working together for a system. And yes, the management of currency and the currency basket against, as you say, a more robust, a more rational, and a more transparent mechanism is quite likely. The delays will come by political compulsions and not by structural reforms. Because at the end, imagine Russia and China and India and some other countries walking hand in hand with geopolitical complexities and polarities at play. But it is desperately needed. For now, India may verbally tell people we are walking out of Shah Bahar because of Iran problem. But our natural gas comes from Iran. We oil, and it is not largest. I think was it Shankar Jayashankar when he Subramanian Jayashankar made this when a European reporter was trying to con him. He says Europe in an afternoon imports more gas from Russia than what we do in a year. So all that apart, the fact is de-dollarization is going to happen. The only discussion left is the modality and the framework that will emerge. Will it stay? If I were to hazard a guess, while gold is a good standard, I think with the way rare earths and minerals are happening, with a lot of conversations on cyber, on cryptocurrency and others, why are we discounting the possibility of a completely new architecture, which is more technological and therefore robust, which is more representative of future? And let's admit it, sometimes we don't know everything what is going to happen. Let's face it, our predecessors didn't know everything that we know today. So we may not know everything, but the change is going on. Conversations at track 2, track 3 are happening on a regular basis. Frameworks are happening, small tests and trials are taking place. Barter economy still works in 2026. And one of the things is with the wheels of the global trade do not run in US or in Europe. They actually run in Africa and Asia and other parts of the world. And Amazon, the biggest lung in the planet, is in South America or Latin America. The largest minerals are in Africa. The technological competence, Asia is amazing. US have been like when they are talking, they'll close the Diego Garcia deal. Chagos Treaty, US is the modern Britain, the colonialists and the imperialists. So there is a limit to which it can run. There's a limit to which this entire scenario can progress. And the South-South cooperation, one of the chapters in the book, is not a convenience, but as you said, for economic security, for wellness of the people, for larger amount of people to be able to make a survival in a sustainable, well-balanced way, will require the global south and these countries outside of the US European framework to come together. And maybe one of the structures of collaboration will be currency or the currency standard. So as I said, while not being aware of the exact framework, how it will take place, I believe it is going to happen, and conversations, maybe we are not even privy to many of these methods and models being tested. Dollar is not going to rule forever. I mean, that I can say with affirmation. How long will the change take place? We don't know.
Oh yeah, I agree with you, sir. Because my wealth manager friend, he told me last year that in the next 2 years you should liquidate all your assets in US dollars. Being a poor man, I didn't have any, so I was not worried too much about it. But yeah, this is the reason because of all the things that are happening in the world. Well, there is always a question about inside my head, which comes from, I believe, common sense, where Costa Rica has one of the best preventive medical systems in the world, period, even though it's a developing country. Where Bhutan has figured out that you have to give priority to nature, people, and then everything else, right? And there are these small experiments happening everywhere in the world, like you said. Taiwan in East Asia is the most progressive nation when it comes to LGBTQ rights, whereas Japan, South Korea, China will probably take another 50 years to come to that, right? Why are we not able to, as a world together, solve smaller issues rather than focus only on the big issues? That is my first question. Because if you are going to create a dent into something, right, you need to scrape away at it, not blast it with a gun from a ship. That is the first question. So the second question is, multiple trends keep changing as we talk about. There are more serious trends to concentrate on, such as the population crisis the world is going through, such as the climate change crisis the world is going through, such as the cybersecurity crisis that the world is going through, such as the fact that our entire world is in debt to itself, which doesn't make any sense. Who are we owing money to? So the financial system doesn't work. These trends are clearly in front of us, but very limited work is being done towards that. Why is that? And if I dare to add one more layer to this, right? One more question would be around the fact that in the 1600s, 1700s, there was this nobility class in colonial countries in Western Europe, which created a system which protected their slave rights and trade rights and all these things. And they created the world as we know today. The capitalism came from that. And today we see US, as you rightly pointed out, as the colonial imperialist. Instead of traders, and now we have technology barons who are probably trying to still run capitalism as it said, and they're absolutely okay moving towards fascism or autocratism and so on and so forth. Why are these three things, which make no sense to any rational person, are still happening in the world, and what can be the solution?
Okay, that's quite a bit, and I'm trying to squeeze them in few minutes. In terms of small things, that's very rational and logical, and the world is largely irrational. I mean, that's the whole idea of the realist theory approach, is the world is inherently anarchic. So when it might be a schoolyard bully, or it might be just the mafia don from the mohalla, when he kicks up a dust storm, unfortunately attention gets diverted to the dust storm to first settle it, so that you can manage a living and make your sham ki roti. That happens. And I think that way, when this whole idea of tariffs and other things rocketed every conversation in 2025, uh, it is inevitable that shift of attention will happen. Not every country may not have the bandwidth to simultaneously address that existential element. Certain countries in Western Africa who depended on the orders of clothes and goods, suddenly, when they had tariffs imposed, their whole structure collapsed. They don't have time to then look at wellness and other aspects of it. In fact, Bhutan was one of the people who was very surprisingly targeted in this tariff war without even knowledge about what they are doing. So you do mention about the wellness aspect. Even New Zealand has a wellness budget and some of these places. So when disruption happens, it takes a while for order to, or at least partial order to resume. We know what happened during the pandemic. The first response was just try and get above this part. So that's the reason sometimes these disruptions can delay what is happening. Thankfully, there are voices of reason. So these small bridges are being built, but at the end of it, it depends on the bandwidth, resource bandwidth, the governance bandwidth, election compulsions, and other areas. But the ground reality is like we have built a network of conversations with a whole lot of people. I was aware of the naval collaborations we were doing, and we had almost 30 different parallel conversations and actual operations. So those are going on. So that is not going to drastically change. Just name me your third point, exact framework which you were asking, and then I'll.
So the third was basically, drawing a parallel between the 1600s,
Yeah,
where
yeah,
the Dutch started creating systems for colonial powers, and
yeah.
today's system where they're trying to perpetuate the same capitalism, but through
So
technology.
so that is where I knew I was trying to recall. I'm not going into a biblical narrative, but there's a very interesting story. There's a dream between King Nebuchadnezzar and an exile from Jew called Daniel about a statue whose head is made of gold, and then the arms of silver, and then bronze, and then feet of iron, and toes of clay. Basically, how each empire, if there's a lot of historical studies on the rise and fall of empires, and they happen over a few centuries. Now, just because we've reached a very high pace, it doesn't mean that it'll happen in decades. Certain transformations do take a long period of time, because if disruption comes over a period of time, post-colonialism as an idea barely started emerging after 60s, even while the world was in a Cold War era of conversations. Then you had the unipolarity, and now you have the multipolarity. I think we are in some kind of vortex as we approach to the second quarter of the 21st century. But there are some trends which are coming very clear. I think more than any other time in history, there is a coagulation of opposition to the dominant imperialist in the world. Anti-USism, if I can use a term, is a feeling in more nations than ever, even during Cold War. They may not yet be friendly to China or Russia or to India or someone, but they're definitely very done with whatever is happening over there. Now, that is the trigger. Now you need a coalescence of power. Now, if you realize the only country which was doing probably very powerful, despite we being in contestation with them, was China. And when China, of course, they went haywire in the debt diplomacy and debt trap, they put people. But the fact is, they did a lot of transformation. You do need something together. And the challenge is in today's era where everything is transparent and globally connected, it's not easy to develop the asymmetry. The US is still surviving on an asymmetry that was there in the early part of the 20th century, and it hasn't gone yet in terms of the sheer volume of technological development, funds, the fund managers, the dollar index. I think de-dollarization will bring change. There is also a structural issue. I don't think there'll be a dominant power in the changing world order. Now, when you're more than one, then you need a very high amount of collaborative work in that. And that probably will be the real challenge. The one who overcomes or becomes the facilitator of that collaboration will probably the one who will bring hope into the situation.
Well, there you have it, guys. The wide, wild world. right? It does sound like a topic from a National Geographic or a Discovery documentary, but then hey, we're all animals, right? And this is a small way of understanding who we are, what we do as societies, as countries, as regions. And if you're a young person stepping into this chaotic world, I would rather recommend that you go through this than go through any of the other technological rabbit holes you might have developed for yourself. Go play video games, nobody's stopping you. Go do your social media thing. But then at the end of the day, you need to understand the world you live in. Because if you do not, tomorrow your progress, your life may actually depend on it. Sir, it was such an amazing conversation with you. I hope my questions were useful and yes.
I'll just take a minute to bring what we are doing. Of course, I teach at the IBDP level, I teach at the universities level. This requires conversations. That's what we stay connected. We also work with people who are in transition, that's beyond the high school and other things. Stay connected with us on the website, johnsonodakkal.com, and reach out to us, but give us also your thought. The book barely costs lesser than a pizza, large pizza. So yeah, I might enjoy a pizza with the book. So that is there.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
give us feedback. We might have work. I am really grateful for my team in this part. But do stay connected. Do give us reviews. We would like to work with you. There's a lot more work to be done, and we need specialists from every field to work this. But both my voice coaching, which I do for the adults, and the academic mentoring, which I do for the high schoolers, is something that we take it as a mission. And thank you, Saurabh, for being a big supporter of that through this. Also, very grateful for the opportunity to take that forward.
Oh, absolutely, sir. It was my pleasure. This book, we are already recommending it as a must read for all our mentees, all our students. You want to have deeper conversation, please, reach out to Johnson, sir. We are going to share the, contact details. We're also going to share the link of the Amazon book place where you can actually buy this. Unfortunately, we're not big enough to give you discounts and all that yet, but hopefully with your support, we will definitely reach there. One thing that this book does not have, and it is not for our lack of trying, by the way, it is that it does not have a lot of viewpoints from Gen Z and Gen Alpha, which we sincerely need. And if you actually look at some of the surveys done in the US, you will see the Gen Z, Gen Alpha people, they are more and more cutting themselves away from the politics. They have stopped caring about what's happening, and that probably is going to lead to some change. We don't know yet. We want to understand more about that with you, because this world is inhabited not only by me, but you, us together. And we only have one planet so far. So let's work towards it together. Happy Republic Day to all of you. May this conversation provoke some very interesting thoughts in your head, ideas that we need to change the world. Johnson, sir, as always, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation.
Happy Republic Day. Wonderful to be here.
Yeah. To all of you, may this